On December 7, 1941, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor brought the United States into World War II. The surprise strike devastated the American Pacific Fleet, sinking or damaging 8 battleships and destroying numerous other vessels and aircraft. As news of the catastrophe spread across America, many wondered if the nation could recover from such a devastating blow. The Japanese believed they had crippled American naval power in the Pacific for years to come. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, who had planned the attack, reportedly said he feared they had awakened a sleeping giant. He was right. What followed was perhaps the most extraordinary industrial mobilization in human history. Within 4 years, American shipyards would produce more vessels than all the Axis powers combined, building an armada that would not only replace what was lost at Pearl Harbor, but create the most powerful navy the world had ever seen. Before America entered the war, its shipbuilding industry was substantial, but not exceptional. In 1939, the United States had launched approximately 100,000 tons of merchant shipping. Britain, still the world's leading maritime power, produced far more. Germany was rapidly expanding its U-boat fleet, while Japan had been building warships at an impressive rate throughout the 1930s. The US Navy, while respectable, ranked behind Britain and was roughly equal to Japan's. Most American shipyards were commercial operations focused on merchant vessels, not warships. The infrastructure existed, but the scale was modest. Few could have imagined that within just a few years, these same shipyards would be launching a new destroyer every 3 days, an escort carrier every week, and a Liberty ship every single day. The transformation required was nothing short of revolutionary. The catalyst for this transformation came not just from Pearl Harbor, but from the desperate situation facing Britain. By 1940, German U-boats were sinking merchant ships faster than Britain could replace them. The island nation faced starvation and defeat, unless the flow of supplies across the Atlantic could be maintained. Britain simply didn't have the shipbuilding capacity to replace its losses while simultaneously building warships to fight the war. President Franklin D. Roosevelt understood that if Britain fell, America would face the Axis powers alone. Even before Pearl Harbor, he had committed to making America the arsenal of democracy. In 1940, he called for the construction of 200 merchant ships. In 1941, this target was raised dramatically. But the real explosion in shipbuilding came after Pearl Harbor, when America faced enemies in both the Atlantic and Pacific. The challenge was immense. Traditional shipbuilding methods were too slow. A standard cargo ship took 8 to 12 months to build using conventional techniques. America needed hundreds, then thousands of ships, and needed them quickly. The answer came from an unlikely source, a California industrialist named Henry J. Kaiser. Kaiser had never built a ship in his life. He was a construction magnate who had made his fortune building dams, bridges, and highways. But Kaiser understood mass production, assembly line efficiency, and modern industrial techniques. When the government asked him to help build ships, he brought a revolutionary approach. Instead of building ships from the keel up in the traditional way, Kaiser proposed using prefabrication and welding instead of riveting. Components would be manufactured in factories across the country and assembled at the shipyard like pieces of a giant jigsaw puzzle. The vessel that would prove Kaiser's methods was the Liberty ship. Based on a simple, sturdy British design, the Liberty ship was not elegant or particularly fast. It was designed to be cheap, quick to build, and easy to operate. The first Liberty ship, the SS Patrick Henry, was launched on September 27, 1941, taking 244 days to build. But as the production methods were refined, construction times plummeted. Within a year, Kaiser's Richmond shipyard in California built the SS Robert E. Peary in just 4 days and 15 hours from keel laying to launch, though this was a publicity stunt and not the normal construction time. The average construction time for a Liberty ship eventually dropped to just 42 days. This was revolutionary. Traditional shipbuilding thought it impossible, yet Kaiser's yards were doing it consistently. The statistics are almost incomprehensible. Between 1941 and 1945, American shipyards built 2,710 Liberty ships alone. Each one could carry 10,000 tons of cargo, enough supplies to sustain an army. They carried tanks to North Africa, ammunition to Britain, food to the Soviet Union via the treacherous Arctic convoys, and supplies to every theatre of war. The Liberty ships were joined by 414 larger and faster Victory ships. These vessels became the lifeline that kept the Allied war effort alive. But the Liberty ships were just the beginning. They were the merchant fleet, the cargo carriers. America also needed to build an entirely new navy to replace what was lost and to project power across two oceans simultaneously. This meant aircraft carriers, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, submarines, and thousands of smaller vessels. The numbers are staggering. During World War II, American shipyards built 141 aircraft carriers of all types. These ranged from massive fleet carriers like the Essex class, which formed the backbone of the Pacific Fleet, to smaller escort carriers built on merchant ship hulls. The escort carriers, often called baby flatops, were particularly important for protecting convoys from submarines and providing air support for amphibious landings. Kaiser's yards alone built 50 escort carriers. The construction time for these carriers was equally impressive. While the Japanese took 4 to 5 years to build a fleet carrier, American yards were launching Essex-class carriers in less than 2 years. Some escort carriers were completed in just 3 months. This wasn't just about quantity. American carriers were well-designed, effective warships that proved superior to their Japanese counterparts in combat. Beyond carriers, America built 10 battleships, 48 cruisers, 349 destroyers, 498 destroyer escorts, and 203 submarines during the war. Each destroyer took approximately 6 months to build, with some yards producing them even faster. Bath Iron Works in Maine became legendary for its destroyer production, launching vessels at an unprecedented rate. The destroyers were crucial for protecting convoys, hunting submarines, and providing fire support during amphibious operations. Meanwhile, submarines from American yards were strangling Japan's maritime lifelines. American subs sank more than 1,300 Japanese merchant ships, totaling over 5 million tons, plus numerous warships. The submarines came from yards like Electric Boat in Connecticut and Mare Island in California, which refined construction techniques to produce boats faster and more efficiently than ever before. But perhaps the most impressive category was amphibious vessels. The Pacific War was a campaign of island hopping, each invasion requiring specialized ships to land troops and equipment on hostile beaches. America built over 2,000 LSTs, or landing ship, tank. These vessels could carry tanks, trucks, and supplies directly onto beaches. They were ungainly, slow, and sailors joked that LST stood for Large Slow Target, but they were essential. Alongside LSTs, yards built thousands of smaller landing craft, LCIs, landing craft, infantry, LCTs, landing craft, tank, and the famous Higgins boats, or LCVPs, landing craft, vehicle, personnel. Andrew Higgins, a New Orleans boat builder, designed the LCVP, which featured a front ramp that allowed troops to charge directly onto beaches. Eisenhower later called Higgins the man who won the war for us, crediting his landing craft designs with making the D-Day invasion possible. In total, the United States built approximately 5,000 major warships and cargo vessels, plus tens of thousands of smaller craft during World War II. To put this in perspective, Japan built approximately 670 warships and cargo vessels during the same period. Germany, focused on U-boats, built around 1,200 submarines but very few surface ships. Italy's shipbuilding effectively ceased after 1943. Britain, despite its long naval tradition, built fewer than 1,000 major vessels, though it started the war with a much larger fleet. The combined shipbuilding output of all Axis powers was less than half of American production. In the merchant category alone, America's advantage was overwhelming. While Germany and Japan tried desperately to sink Allied merchant ships, America was replacing losses and adding to the total. By 1943, American yards were launching more merchant tonnage each month than Germany and Japan combined could sink. How was this possible? The answer lies in multiple factors. First was the adoption of modern manufacturing techniques. Henry Kaiser's prefabrication and welding methods were revolutionary. Instead of riveters laboriously joining plates together, welders could complete joints faster and create stronger hulls. Entire sections of ships were built in factories miles from the water, then transported to shipyards for assembly. This meant work could continue regardless of weather and allowed for quality control in factory conditions. Standardization was key. The Liberty ships, for example, used interchangeable parts. A propeller manufactured in Pittsburgh would fit any Liberty ship being built in California, Maine, or Texas. This allowed for mass production of components and simplified repairs. Damaged ships could be quickly repaired with standardized replacement parts sent from America. The workforce transformation was equally remarkable. In 1939, American shipyards employed approximately 100,000 workers. By 1943, this had exploded to over 1.7 million. These weren't all experienced shipbuilders. Many had never set foot in a shipyard before the war. They were farmers, teachers, shopkeepers, and students who answered their country's call. Training programs were established to teach welding, fitting, and other specialized skills in weeks rather than years. The most dramatic change was the massive influx of women into shipyards. Before the war, shipbuilding was almost exclusively male. By 1943, women constituted a significant portion of the workforce, with some yards employing women for nearly a quarter of their positions. These women, often called Rosie the Riveters after the iconic propaganda figure, welded, fitted pipes, operated cranes, and performed virtually every job in the yard. The working conditions were challenging. Shipyard work was dangerous, with workers laboring in cramped spaces, at heights, and with heavy machinery. Accidents were common. The pace was relentless, with many yards operating 24 hours a day in 3 shifts. Workers put in 6 or 7-day weeks, with overtime common. But morale remained high. These workers understood they were contributing directly to the war effort. Every ship launched was another blow against tyranny, another step toward victory. Shipyards held ceremonies for each launch, often with a worker's wife or daughter christening the vessel. These events reinforced the connection between the workers and the ships they built. There was genuine pride in the work, and competition between yards to build ships faster became intense. The geographic distribution of shipbuilding was itself impressive. Major shipbuilding centers emerged across the country. On the West Coast, Kaiser's yards in Richmond and Vancouver, and the established yards in Seattle, San Diego, and Los Angeles churned out vessels for the Pacific War. The East Coast had traditional centers like Bath, Maine, Quincy, Massachusetts, and Brooklyn, New York. The Gulf Coast saw massive expansion with yards in Mobile, New Orleans, Houston, and other cities. Even inland rivers hosted shipyards. Evansville, Indiana, on the Ohio River, built LSTs. This geographic spread provided redundancy. Enemy action couldn't cripple American shipbuilding because it was distributed across thousands of miles. It also meant efficient use of regional resources and labor pools. The industrial infrastructure supporting shipbuilding was equally impressive. Steel mills worked at maximum capacity, producing the millions of tons of steel plates needed. Rolling mills shaped these plates to specifications. Factories produced engines, boilers, generators, pumps, and thousands of other components. The electrical industry provided miles of wiring for each ship. Furniture manufacturers made bunks and tables. Textile mills produced canvas and uniforms. The entire American economy was mobilized to support ship construction. Railroad networks transported materials and components to shipyards. The logistics alone were mind-boggling, yet the system worked with remarkable efficiency. Bottlenecks were identified and resolved quickly. When a shortage of one component threatened to slow production, factories would be retooled or new suppliers found within weeks. Innovation continued throughout the war. Early Liberty ships suffered structural failures, with some breaking in half in heavy seas. Engineers quickly identified the problem: stress fractures propagating from square hatch corners in welded hulls. The solution was simple: round the corners and add reinforcing straps. This modification was implemented across the fleet, and in new construction, ships became progressively better. The Victory ships that followed the Liberty ships were faster and more capable. Destroyer designs evolved with improved radar, sonar, and anti-aircraft weaponry. Escort carriers gained more effective catapults and arresting gear. American shipbuilders didn't just build ships, they continuously improved them based on combat experience. This feedback loop from fleet to shipyard and back ensured American vessels became increasingly effective as the war progressed. The contrast with Axis shipbuilding was stark. Germany had started the war with an excellent shipbuilding industry, but Allied bombing progressively destroyed it. By 1944, German yards struggled to complete U-boats, their construction constantly disrupted by air raids. Quality suffered as experienced workers were conscripted and replaced with forced labor. Japan faced similar problems. American submarines and aircraft destroyed Japanese merchant shipping faster than yards could replace it. Japanese shipyards were also bombed, and by 1945 construction had virtually ceased. More critically, both Germany and Japan lacked resources. Steel, copper, and other materials were in desperately short supply. Japan particularly suffered from lack of raw materials as American submarines cut supply lines from the conquered territories. American shipyards, by contrast, operated in complete safety. Not a single German or Japanese bomb fell on an American shipyard during the war. This allowed uninterrupted production at maximum efficiency. Workers didn't spend time in bomb shelters. Facilities weren't damaged and didn't need rebuilding. Raw materials flowed freely from American mines, mills, and factories. This security was an enormous advantage that's often overlooked when comparing industrial output. The psychological impact on workers was also significant. American shipyard workers could focus entirely on their jobs without fear for their lives or families. This contributed to the high morale and productivity that characterized American war production. The contrast with German and Japanese workers, constantly under threat of aerial bombardment, was profound. The impact of American shipbuilding on the war's outcome cannot be overstated. In the Atlantic, the tide turned in 1943 when Allied merchant ship production finally exceeded U-boat sinkings. This was almost entirely due to American yards. The merchant fleet kept Britain supplied and enabled the buildup of forces for D-Day. In the Pacific, the fast carriers built in American yards became the primary striking force that destroyed Japanese naval power. The carrier battles of 1944, particularly the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, saw American carriers and their aircraft annihilate Japanese naval aviation. By 1945, the U.S. Navy was operating with virtual impunity in Japanese home waters, its carriers launching strikes against the Japanese mainland itself. None of this would have been possible without the ships American yards produced. The amphibious capability America developed through its landing craft production enabled the island-hopping campaign that brought forces to Japan's doorstep. Every landing from Guadalcanal to Okinawa depended on the LSTs, LCIs, and Higgins boats from American yards. The invasions of North Africa, Sicily, Italy, and ultimately Normandy all relied on American-built amphibious vessels. Even British and Commonwealth forces often used American landing craft. The D-Day invasion alone employed thousands of American-built vessels. Without them, the liberation of Europe would have been impossible, or at least delayed by years. The ability to project power from sea to land, to put armies ashore on hostile beaches, was perhaps America's greatest military advantage, and it came directly from the shipyards. The destroyer escorts and escort carriers that protected convoys were equally vital. The Battle of the Atlantic was won not by sinking every U-boat, but by ensuring convoys got through with acceptable losses. American-built escort vessels made this possible. They provided the numbers needed to escort every convoy to hunt U-boat wolf packs, and to ensure supplies reached their destinations. In the Pacific, these escorts protected the vulnerable supply lines that sustained operations across vast oceanic distances. The Japanese strategy of attacking supply lines with submarines largely failed Because American escorts were so numerous and effective, Japan's merchant fleet was destroyed while America's grew, a disparity that doomed Japan's war effort, regardless of battlefield outcomes. The submarines from American yards waged a devastatingly effective campaign against Japan. While less celebrated than carrier battles, the submarine blockade of Japan was arguably more important strategically. Japan, an island nation dependent on imported resources, couldn't survive having its shipping destroyed. American submarines sank over 60% of Japanese merchant tonnage and about 30% of Japanese warships. They cut Japan off from oil, rubber, metals, and food from its conquered territories. By 1945, Japan was starving, and its industries were grinding to a halt, not from bombing but from lack of raw materials. This submarine campaign was only possible because American yards built enough boats to maintain a constant pressure on Japanese shipping while replacing combat losses. Beyond the immediate war effort, American shipbuilding created infrastructure and expertise that lasted decades. The massive shipyards built during the war, the trained workforce, and the accumulated expertise positioned America as the world's dominant naval power for the rest of the century. Many wartime shipyards continued operations into the Cold War, building the ships that projected American power globally. The techniques developed during the war, particularly welding and prefabrication, became standard practice. Some wartime-built ships served for decades. Many Liberty ships continued in merchant service into the 1960s. Essex-class carriers, built in 2 years during wartime, served until the 1970s, with several lasting even longer. The Oriskany, an Essex-class carrier, wasn't retired until 1976, more than 30 years after its construction. The economic impact was equally profound. The massive investment in shipyards, the employment of millions, and the industrial infrastructure created contributed significantly to America's post-war prosperity. Cities like Richmond, California, were transformed by shipyard construction. What had been a small town of 20,000 became a city of over 100,000, as Kaiser's shipyards drew workers from across the country. Similar transformations occurred in dozens of communities. The social changes were also lasting. The women who worked in shipyards gained skills, confidence, and economic independence. While many returned to traditional roles after the war, the precedent had been set. The idea that women could perform men's work had been proven beyond doubt, contributing to post-war social changes. The story of African American workers in shipyards is particularly significant. Shipyards, desperate for labor, hired black workers in large numbers, often for the first time in skilled positions. While discrimination persisted, with segregated facilities and unequal pay common, the experience of working in integrated environments and proving their capability in skilled trades contributed to the post-war civil rights movement. Some shipyards, particularly on the West Coast, were relatively progressive for their time. The economic opportunity drew African Americans from the South in what became part of the Great Migration. These workers established communities and created economic foundations that lasted beyond the war. The experience of wartime integration, however imperfect, provided arguments and momentum for the integration of the armed forces and wider society in subsequent decades. The technological innovations from wartime shipbuilding also had lasting civilian applications. Welding techniques developed for ship construction were applied across industries. Prefabrication methods influenced post-war housing construction. Modular design principles became standard in many fields. The organizational and logistical systems developed to coordinate ship production influenced post-war manufacturing and supply chain management. Many business leaders and managers who learned their skills coordinating wartime shipbuilding went on to lead major corporations in the post-war era. The lessons of mass production, quality control, and efficient organization shaped American industry for decades. In this way, the shipbuilding miracle contributed not just to winning the war but to American economic dominance in the post-war world. Certain individuals and companies became legendary. Henry Kaiser became one of America's most celebrated industrialists. His success in shipbuilding leading to ventures in automobiles, steel, and healthcare. Andrew Higgins, the designer of the landing craft, was celebrated as a genius of practical engineering. Companies like Bath Iron Works, Newport News Shipbuilding, and Electric Boat established reputations for excellence that continue today. These yards still build America's warships, a direct lineage from World War II. The workers, too, became part of American mythology. The anonymous welders, fitters, and laborers who built ships through long hours and hard work embodied the home front contribution to victory. Their story became part of the greatest generation narrative, a source of pride and inspiration. The scale of achievement becomes even more impressive when considering the time frame. In December 1941, America's shipbuilding capacity was modest. By late 1943, just 2 years later, American yards were producing more ships than all other nations combined, Axis and Allied alike. This transformation occurred while simultaneously building a massive army and air force, producing tanks, aircraft, and weapons in unprecedented quantities, and supplying allies through Lend-Lease. The shipbuilding surge was just one part of a larger industrial mobilization, but it was perhaps the most visible and dramatic. Ships are large, complex machines that require sophisticated engineering and coordination to produce. Doing so in days and weeks rather than months and years seemed impossible, yet America did it consistently for 4 years. Comparing specific examples illustrates the disparity. The Essex-class carriers were arguably the best carriers of the war. America built 24 of them, with construction times ranging from 15 to 20 months. Japan's closest equivalent was the Tai-Ho, a single carrier that took 4 years to build and was sunk shortly after completion. In battleships, America built 10 modern fast battleships during the war. Japan built 2. The super battleships Yamato and Musashi, which took years to complete and were both sunk without significantly affecting the war's outcome. In destroyers, the disparity was even greater. America built hundreds. Japan managed a few dozen. Every category showed similar patterns. Even when Axis designs were excellent, and they often were, the numbers overwhelmed quality. A German U-boat was a formidable weapon, but not when facing dozens of escort vessels per convoy. The merchant marine sailors who manned these ships deserve recognition. Serving in the merchant marine was dangerous, with loss rates comparable to combat forces. U-boat attacks, airstrikes, mines, and the dangers of the sea itself claimed many lives. Yet these civilians, for the merchant marine was not a military service, kept sailing. They transported the supplies that kept armies fighting, often through submarine-infested waters. Their courage was essential to victory. The ships American yards built were only effective because brave men sailed them into harm's way. The combination of industrial might producing the ships and the courage of those who sailed them created an unstoppable logistics system. Germany and Japan could sink individual ships, but they couldn't sink enough to matter when hundreds more were being launched. In the final analysis, American shipbuilding during World War II represents one of history's great industrial achievements. It demonstrated the potential of American industry, the effectiveness of mass production techniques, and the power of a motivated workforce. It showed that free societies could mobilize effectively for total war. The ships built in American yards between 1941 and 1945 didn't just win World War II. They established the foundation for American power for the rest of the 20th century. The Navy built in those years, continuously modernized and expanded, secured sea lanes, projected power, and maintained peace through strength for generations. The industrial base created to build warships transitioned to commercial shipbuilding, supporting American maritime commerce. The story of how American shipyards outbuilt the Axis is ultimately a story of American industrial, organizational, and human capacity, a capacity that, when fully mobilized, proved unstoppable. Today, some of those ships remain. Liberty ships can be found preserved as museum ships, reminders of the merchant fleet that sustained the Allied cause. The U.S. Texas, a battleship that served in both World Wars, is being restored. The submarine USS Pampanito, an example of the boats that strangled Japan's economy, welcomes visitors in San Francisco. These preserved vessels serve as monuments not just to naval power, but to the industrial workers who built them. They remind us that wars are won not only on battlefields, but in factories, shipyards, and workshops. The welders, riveters, and fitters who labored in American shipyards contributed as much to victory as the soldiers, sailors, and airmen who fought. Their achievement, building an armada that outproduced the entire Axis coalition, remains one of the most impressive feats in industrial and military history. It stands as testament to what can be accomplished when a nation dedicates itself fully to a cause. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share.